Thank you, and good morning. So I think you know that my topic today is this book, Parental Alienation Theory, Official Synopsis. And I think you know that we brought 200 of these to the meeting, and they're all gone. So everybody I think, has gotten their free copy. So that's good. We want you to enjoy it and study it a little bit so that you have a handle on what it's about and why we're doing this. This book is a little different from other books, and I'm going to try to explain what we have in mind. So the PDF came out about 2 months ago, but the actual printed copy just came out a few weeks ago. And you recognize the cover, at least I hope you do, because the cover of the book is our website. In other words, we're trying to create a, what do you call it, a theme or something, or branding using the same picture on the website as is on the cover of the book. So we already have lots of books. In fact, there's a table out here put up by Mark Roseman, thank you, which has 15 or so books on it, more recent ones. So do we need any more? Well, we do. But in case you're not aware, our members over the years, I think I just said, have published more than 100 books about either parental alienation or some related topic. This is some of them. If you go to the website, we actually have a section of the website that lists books by members, not just books by anybody, but books by members of PASG. And some of you are going to recognize these. Some of these people are here at this meeting, some of these authors. Rod McCall, I saw the other day. Here are a couple more. If your book is real recent, it's not on my little display here because I got to admit, I made this a couple years ago. But we're working on it. We're going to get the more recent books posted also on the website. So what is it? What do we need? Why do we need another one? So there are certain things that are unusual about this, and I'm going to spell them out. I'm going to make it explicit what it is that makes the official synopsis unusual and, I hope, useful. So first of all, if you look on the cover of the book, the author is down here. That's where the author's name usually is. And in this case, the author is the organization. The author is not any specific individuals. The author is PASG. And we're doing that because we want it to look like an official document. This is not just a Bill Bernet or Jennifer Harmon document. We want it to look like it's an official document of this organization. And other organizations do the same thing. I mean, obviously, you've looked at the DSM and the ICD. The author of the DSM is the American Psychiatric Association. It's not specific individuals, and the same thing for ICD. So we decided to do it this way in order to make it clear that we're trying to make what we consider an official document. But it does have authors. I mean, it was obviously written by somebody. The 16 contributing authors are all listed in the book. So who are the 16 contributing authors? They're members of the board of directors of PASG, either current members or former members. So we're using that as kind of a ploy almost to make it even more official, that it's actually written by our leadership, even though there are a lot of people in PSG who know how to write books and know how to write articles, But for purposes of this book, we list the 16 contributing authors, and we say that they're the members of the board of directors. So who owns this book? Well, the copyright is owned by PASG. And if there are any royalties, we hope to get some royalties, that they will come to the organization. A lot of our books have been published by the same company. The name of it is Charles C. Thomas, which is a publisher in Springfield, Illinois. And starting with the International Handbook, the big book that Richard Gardner edited and was published in 2006, starting with that book, Charles C. Thomas has now published 6 or 7 books about parental alienation. And there are 2 more coming that I know. Actually, I think there are 3 more that I know about that are coming. One of which is Richard Warshak's collected articles that he decided, after all his years of scholarship, he decided to collect them and into a book that's coming out in a couple of months. I think there's some advertising around here for it. And it's being published by Charles C. Thomas. So the head of that company, Michael Thomas, has been very, very helpful in promoting the scholarship around parental alienation. It has not always been that way. I hope you're somewhat familiar with the big book that Gardner published. It was called the International Handbook of Parental Alienation Syndrome. It had people from 30 countries and so on. That book was going to be published, and people objected to it. People who objected to PA objected to the publisher, and they turned it back, even though they had already signed a contract to publish the International Handbook. It was removed from their agenda, and that's how Richard Gardner eventually found Charles C. Thomas, which has been a wonderful publisher. So the idea that he has agreed to publish 7 or 8 books about PA is wonderful, and he's been very, very helpful. So anyway, I guess I was trying to make the point that usually the copyright is owned by the publishing company, but in this case, that they said, why doesn't PASG own the copyright, which makes it even more official document. So I think you all know we tried to get the word out that anybody can get this book for free on the website. You got it for free by coming today to this meeting, but anybody in the world can get it for free by going to the PASG website, and you scroll down a little bit, and there's a cover of the book, and anybody can go there, and then they can download it for free. And what we're telling people is, don't post it anywhere, because we want the only master copy to be on the website. We don't want people posting their own copy at some other place. You know why? Because we plan to update this. The whole idea is that as we update it, there are going to be new versions, and we don't want multiple versions of the book floating around in different places. So this is actually the correct references. Since the author of the book is Parental Alienation Study Group, that should go first, and then the name of the book, and then the publisher. So what else is unusual about this? Well, I've already said that we've made a big deal out of calling it the official synopsis. We did get a little bit of flack about that when we distributed that idea before the book was published. Some people said, well, that's a little bit presumptuous. What makes it official? Well, that's what we're saying it is, because it's our product. And, PASG is the biggest and most active organization in the world regarding this topic. So I think that we're entitled to say something official. Why does it say synopsis? Well, we purposefully have made this book short. There are enormous books about parental alienation, the International Handbook, the handbook that Dimos Lorandos and I did. Those books are 400 pages long, and they have 1,500 references. And we purposely wanted to make a book that a judge or a guardian ad litem or an attorney could read in 2 hours. So the actual text is only about 140 pages. We would like for this to be introduced as evidence in custody dispute trials, as providing a basic foundation. In other words, it doesn't go through all the nuances and all the different possibilities, but it does cover, we wanted it to cover the basic information that a judge or a legislator needs to know about this topic if they're making some kind of decision related to alienation. So what else is unusual? Why does it say first edition? You know, most books, even the first edition, don't say on it first edition because that's just not normal. So the publisher asked us about that, and he was going to take that off. And I said, no, we want to make it explicit that this is only the beginning. We hope to, and maybe in 2 or 3 years, have a new edition, because we hope to have corrections or adjustments made on the basis of input from other people. And in other words, our ultimate goal is to have a consensus document that's endorsed by dozens or hundreds of people and organizations that agree that this is the fundamental information about parental alienation. Excuse me. Incidentally, my various authors and my secret co-editor, Ashish, I told you we're trying to keep it secret as to who did this, but Ashish and I were the editors, and we have all these 16 authors. We only started with this a year ago. In August of last year, we had this brainstorm of putting this together. We got the authors together, I think, in September. We nagged them, and they produced their material in October and November. And so the whole shebang was created in less than a year, which is a pretty good record. So let me run down the components of what's in this book. It's sort of basic. First of all, we kind of went out of our way to get compliments. we wanted to be as much as possible as we could to make it that other people like this book. And so we invited some pretty prominent people to write. You know how you write these little blurbs that go in the very beginning of the book, and it's called praise for this book. And Bill Eddy is this wonderful guy in Los Angeles who's talked a lot about high conflict cases. Ron Rohner is a distinguished professor in Connecticut. Richard Warshak, of course, is an international expert on this topic, and he very kindly wrote a nice little blurb about what a good book this is. And his book is coming out, and I wrote a little blurb for his book. So I think we try to be helpful to each other. The other thing we made a point of trying to make this look international. So in addition to the little blurbs, we have welcome statements, and these are from different countries. Judge Marazzi is a kind of a famous judge. He was an appellate judge in Argentina, and he's very active in the area of alienation, and he's written his own books about alienation and about family law, which were published in Argentina. So he wrote a welcome statement, which is in Spanish and English. We're trying to convey that we want to stay in touch with people from lots of countries. And Jesper Lashy, our own member, wrote a welcome statement from Denmark. And Sarah Game is a woman from Australia. Australia has provinces or territories, and she's the representative in one of those regional legislatures. And Stan Carosi put us in touch with her, and she wrote a welcome. And as we hope, as future editions come out, we hope that important or prominent people from other countries write more welcome statements from other countries. Some of that is already happening. We think an edition in German is going to come out, and there'll be a separate German welcome statement in that book. So we're trying to convey that this is already being endorsed by people from a variety of perspectives. And one of those people is Matthew Sullivan. Dr. Sullivan is a really prominent writer in the field of parental alienation. He's not a member of PASG, which is the whole point, is to get people sort of conveying endorsement who are not friends of ours, who are not members. But you might know Dr. Sullivan. He was the president of AFCC, the Association of Family and Conciliation Courts, a couple of years ago. And he's written a number of articles about this topic. So this is, I guess, obviously I'm trying to convey that this book has already been vetted by various people who thought it was a good idea. There are two main divisions of the book. There's basic PA theory, and then there's another half of the book on sort of extra things. Each of these chapters are very short. They're only 4 or 5 pages, and each chapter only has a few citations, because as I've said about 6 times, we're trying to make this readable, and we're trying to convey the basic information, the basic principles. So some of this is obvious, like definitions and how do you do a diagnosis, the prevalence of, and we distinguish between parental alienation in the child, in alienating behaviors, the prevalence of those in the parents, and so on. The very last thing on this list, it says similar and related concepts. I've been interested in that. In other books I've done, I've made a point of discussing other concepts in mainstream psychology that are related to alienation. For instance, cognitive dissonance is a phenomenon that people experience where they have contradictory thoughts that make them uncomfortable. So that happens in alienation with children experience cognitive dissonance with regard to their 2 parents. Or false memories. All that research about false memories is relevant. Research about how people influence other people and how people are easily indoctrinated. So there's other fields of psychology. My point is that we're not just standing out here all by ourselves, that our discipline is part and is embedded among all these other aspects of psychology. That's what similar and related concepts is. So these are the main core components, and then we have some extra components. We put together a little history and some of these other topics. Now, some of these topics are specifically related to fighting misinformation. One of the most common statements of misinformation about our field is that there's no evidence, there's no research. And so that's why we have a whole chapter here. Well, we have one chapter on qualitative and one chapter on quantitative research. There's another, and we have our own experts do these. Like Amy Baker wrote a chapter on research, for example. We have another misinformation is that people make this statement that parental alienation is not appropriate to bring up in court, that it's not a legitimate topic for court. And so we have a whole chapter on Dimos Lorandos's research, in which he found more than 1,000 cases in the United States where parental alienation was introduced. And so these chapters are an attempt to systematically refute the main pieces of misinformation. There's another one, the recognition of alienation by professional organizations. I'm sure you've heard that 20 times. The people say, oh, PA has never been recognized by any professional organization. Well, it has. You know, like the American Psychological Association and the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry and others. And so we have a chapter that summarizes how it has been accepted. So anyway, that's our attempt to refute different ideas of misinformation. Oh, we have other chapters that are sort of interesting. The international aspects of alienation. We have something kind of creative that Stan Carosi is interested in, which is the socio-political perspectives. The whole idea there is that alienation can be thought about not simply within a kid or within a family, but within a society. What are the forces within a society that push the occurrence of parental alienation? And finally, we end up with a discussion of misinformation, which of course I'm fanatical about, and a topic which is called different perspectives, which I'm going to tell you more about. One of our lessons learned for next year is to put the little table closer to the podium. So, one of the agendas here is that we are hoping to have dialogue and collaboration with people whom we don't always agree with. We're really interested in different perspectives because we realize that to progress, you have to listen to people who have different ideas about a topic. I'm going to get to that. Let me just finish up here about the components. So we have references. The big books on alienation have more than 1,000 references. So this is a little book. It has 300 references. And we do indicate that there are 20 or so that we highly recommend. And then we have other references and an index. So those are the components. But the other final, in the last few pages of the book, is where we explain that we want endorsements. We want individual practitioners or scholars or professors. We also want organizations, and we also want advocacy groups to say that they like this book. And there's a way to do it. When you go online to download your free PDF, in that same page, there's a section that says, do you have any additions or corrections to the book? And there's also a section that says, will you endorse this book? So we already have about 60 or 70 that are in the back of this book right here. I gave some examples. There's an organization in Brazil, in Ireland, in Colorado, in Japan, but we'd like to get many more because I'll spell it out again. We're trying to create a document that is broadly agreed upon with basic information, so that I'm tired of people saying there's no generally accepted definition of parental alienation. I want to get past that and to be able to say we have a definition that's endorsed by hundreds of scholars and hundreds of organizations. That's our goal. So, have you ever heard this term? This term was actually introduced a few years ago by this guy. Daniel Kahneman was a psychologist and an economist. And he was famous for several reasons, one of which he got the Nobel Prize in economics a few years ago, which is pretty good. And he had this famous book called Thinking Fast and Slow. And he and his colleagues, as psychologists, wrote about cognitive biases, one of which, confirmation bias, just as an example. And these are terms that are now simply generally accepted, but Kahneman and his friends actually discussed these and defined them and made them well known. So one of Kahneman's ideas was that adversarial collaboration is a good idea. In fact, this was his definition. It occurs when people who disagree work together to test a hypothesis, trying not to win, but to figure out what's true. They might even become friends. So, this quote I dug up from the Google, and I think that this is part of what he said when he got his Nobel Prize a few years ago, that this was one of the things he brought up. And he did this in his own work, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. So the whole idea is, rather than debate people or fight with people, that if they have different opinions, you try to sit down with them and say, well, tell me what you think, and is there common ground? Is there something that we can agree on and move forward? And that's the whole idea, that this is our first step, and that we're stating our opinions about definitions and so on, and we welcome people who don't agree with us to chip in and see if we can come up with some common terminology that everybody can agree on. So the Greeks knew all about this, and they had a word called agonism. So you can look at this definition. It's a form of strife and difference that is productive and beneficial. So the whole idea is that when people have different opinions, if they express them and compare them, they can work out something that's even better, and they can move forward. So that's agonism, and that's what we do. That's what we think we're doing. And in fact, from the beginning, this organization has been what's called a big tent, is that we welcome people who have some different opinions. Now, I gotta say that we expect them to all that we all fundamentally have the same opinions about the importance of parental alienation and basic ideas about fundamental principles and definitions and so on. But we need to work out some of the differences. And that's why we have a big tent. So there's actually the opposite of agonism. There's another word, which I'm not really familiar with, but I looked it up. Irenicism is the opposite. It's a state of peace defined by a total absence of friction. Well, that's not really so good. I mean, that sounds like that would be a sweet thing, but that is stagnation. If there's no discussion and no comparison of notes and no debate, you get stuck. And so we don't want to do that. We want to be able to grow by collaborating with people that might have different opinions. So I'm trying to say that this book has a bigger mission than just being a new book. So what about this idea? Is it possible to engage in some kind of legitimate discussion in which people with different opinions sit down and try to communicate with each other? Well, I know that the AFCC is a somewhat provocative organization. As you know, the Association of Family Conciliation Courts have for years tried to engage in this process of getting people together with different opinions and talking to each other. People have different opinions about AFCC. Almost a lot of people complain about them. The parental alienation people complain that AFCC does not recognize PA sufficiently, and the domestic violence people complain that AFCC pays too much attention to PA. Well, believe it or not, the leadership of AFCC have purposefully remained somewhat neutral around this topic, around some other topics in which they have welcomed, in their conferences, they have welcomed discussions of domestic violence and discussions of alienation and discussions of both of them together, because they had this idea that if people talk together, maybe eventually there'll be more consensus. And also the journal, Family Court Review, has published wonderful articles about alienation and also horrible articles about alienation, which we've fussed about. So anyway, AFCC was part of my inspiration to do this book, because they, in fact, have done somewhat similar things. So just as an example of how people with different opinions can hopefully get together and have some common ground, this is a simple example, is that all of us, I think, would agree that domestic violence is a serious problem, but that sometimes there are false allegations of domestic violence. And not only that, parental alienation is a serious problem, but sometimes there are false allegations of parental alienation. Those are fairly simple assertions, and I think that if you actually sit down and talk to people, almost everybody would agree with that. I've tried to do that, and I'm actually not very successful at actually getting the people with different opinions to agree with those two statements. But we have tried. I've told you AFCC is promoting this, and they actually had a word for this called peace talks. And this got played out in the meeting, the AFCC meeting in Boston last year in 2024. And that this was the big event. This was the opening event at that AFCC conference in Boston, in which 5 of us with different opinions talked about parent-child contact problems. And if you look at this, you can see that I'm there. I'm representing my end. Peter Jaffe is a big proponent and person concerned about domestic violence, so he's on the other end. And then some of us were in the middle, I guess you could say. So I'm just using this as an example that this has actually happened, this idea of getting people with different opinions together and trying to create something together. And we created this big event in Boston. So I'm not just inventing this off the top of my head, this idea of collaboration, but this has actually happened. This is a second thing in the same meeting. And in this case, Ashish and I were on one side of the discussion, and Benjamin Garber and Robert Simon were on the other side. And we had gotten together ahead of time, and we compared notes, and we tried to make an outline of what we agreed on and what we didn't agree on. So this idea of collaboration is not sort of my own invention, but it's part of this broader effort in our field, which I think is a really important effort. There was one more step. That was in May, and then in November, there was one more similar thing that happened in their meeting in Ohio. So I'll even give you a couple more examples of this kind of collaboration I'm talking about, that I'm pushing. So somebody I know who's a sort of a critic of PA, that we both have a lot of information about the history and specifically about Richard Gardner. There are a lot of misstatements about what Richard Gardner said and did and what he wrote. And so I thought it would be fun to actually go back and somewhat obsessively study his writings to try to straighten out some of these misunderstandings. So this other guy and I are working on that. Or there's another idea of getting together and presenting a topic at a meeting, like an AFCC meeting or some other meeting where the two presenters have different opinions. We actually did this. Last year in Oslo, we had a critic of parental alienation, Bob Simon, and he came to Oslo and he made a presentation in which he had some suggestions and some criticisms about what we do. And the same thing happened yesterday, is that Dr. Nick Balla, who's a famous law professor here in Canada, he gave a presentation in which he made some criticisms of what we do. So we have tried to engage in this activity of listening to people and trying to collaborate with people that we don't always agree with. Incidentally, I'm going to stop early, 5 minutes early, because I have this idea that there should be time to go from one room to another. And secondly, I hope there's going to be some discussion. So secondly, I'm going to stop even earlier than the 5 minutes early in order to, why don't we have some discussion and some questions? But I have a couple of other things to, this whole idea. Why do we want to do this? Well, if we sit down and have discussions and collaborate, we obviously increase the number of people who know what we're talking about simply by having these conversations. And hopefully, we reduce the number of misunderstandings. There are lots of misunderstandings and misinformation about Gardner, about us, about this topic, about many of our members have been victims of misinformation. And I think if we try to collaborate, some of that will go away. It helps us be clearer. I've been told that the reason why we have some of these misinformations is that we were not clear in the first place. And I went back and looked at what we wrote. And anyway, so I guess that's a good suggestion, is we should try to be clearer in what we say in the first place. And maybe there are things where we need more research. I'm sure that's true. And it motivates us to correct things. And here's one more thing. We make new friends. So that's kind of cool as a reason to collaborate regarding this topic. Well, I've already tried to do that with regard to this book. And when the book was even in the PDF, in the early stages, I sent it around and I asked people, these people who are typically critics of PA theory, to read it and send in corrections or suggestions. And so far, I've gotten very negative feedback. Like, here's one. I said that we're trying to make a consensus document. So here this guy said, how can this be a consensus document when the authors are all PA advocates? And this book is published by PASG. Well, we had to do it this way because they wouldn't. I tried to get people to come together last summer, and they all didn't want to. So if you're going to have a consensus, somebody has to start. Somebody has to start with an initial document for other people to respond to. Here's another criticism. Calling this adversarial collaboration is misleading, inaccurate, and dishonest. I thought that was a pretty nasty comment. Here's another guy. The misleading is they use a lot. I will not contribute to this volume. I believe that it is flawed and misleading. I mean, these are our critics. I mean, this is kind of what we have to address, is get past this idea that we're faking people. Referring to diagnosis of alienation is misleading, and so on. So I got to tell you, we had this wonderful idea, and we haven't, we have we're having a little trouble getting it off the ground. But anyway, do you all know Jeremy? He's this kid in this comic strip, and he is experimenting with adversarial collaboration. He says, wait, hold on. What would you guys think about adding an oboe solo right here to his band members? And they didn't like the idea. And he says collaboration is overrated. So we're getting lots of feedback from different sources. So here we are. I've got a couple minutes to explain what's going to happen next. First of all, we already have the website. In other words, if you go to our homepage and then you go to this book, you come to a new page that explains it, and it's where you download it and where you can give comments. So that exists. Please look at it. We hope to collect edits and corrections from not just people in this room and people in our organization, but people who are not here, who want to help make it a better book. As I said, we hope to get endorsements from many, many people. Now, let's talk about book reviews. We really want there to be book reviews in leading psychology, psychiatry, social work journals. And so we hope that you all help make that happen. And the book reviews, as you know, the politics, they frequently happen because of word of mouth or because you're friends of an editor. If any of you are friends with a journal editor or a book review editor, please send them the book. Now, the publisher has already sent out 20 or so books to different journals. But if you happen to know somebody personally, please encourage them to do a book review of this book. You may think that's a little far-fetched, friends of friends. I'll give you an example. My wife's stepmother wrote a book, and she happened on previous occasions, she was a writer, and she had written articles occasionally for the New York Times book review section, which is this wonderful thing that comes out every Sunday. And when her book came out, her book was on the front page, her own book was on the front page of the New York Times book review section, simply because she had a connection. She had a firm connection. It wasn't because of the scholarship of the book. It was simply because she had a firm connection with the people in the book review section. So if any of you have friends, please do what you can. I think that the newsletter of AFCC is called the e-news, the electronic news, and I think there's going to be a review in that newsletter by a prominent AFCC person. So we are working, and what we're trying to do is spread the word not simply of the book, but of the concept of adversarial collaboration. So either one, I hope a review person recognizes both of those aspects. Oops, did I cover all the next steps, book reviews? Oh, and build consensus for future editions. Now, as I said, we're collecting edits. No sooner had this come out, and somebody sent me a correction. I'll give you a hint. It has to do with definitions, not the main core definitions, but some auxiliary definitions. And what it says in this book is mistaken. I already know that there's a mistake that needs to be corrected in the next edition. So I'm having a contest to see if anybody else identifies this. I looked it up, and the guy who told me about it was correct. It's a little bit esoteric, so you might not really pick it up. But my point is that we've already started this correction process, and I am curious to see if anybody else in the entire world picks up the same correction. We also hope to get some translations done. One's already underway in German. I've heard from the people this week from Finland that they're going to work on it. We hope that the people in Argentina will work on the Spanish one, and so on. And we do have a goal. We want this to be the most widely read document in the world. Do you know what is currently the most widely read book in the world? Anybody want to guess? No, I mean, that's the Bible, yes. The most widely read book regarding parental alienation is Divorce Poison, is Richard Warshak's book. And there was an original one, and then there was an update, and so on. But that's been translated into 7 or 8 languages, and at least according to Dr. Warshak, that is the most widely read book in the world on this topic. So anyway, we want to go past that, and the whole idea is that we want this to influence other people, like judges and legislators and guardians and so on. We don't just want it just to sit on a shelf. We want it to actually influence. And the only way that can happen is we have to keep it short. Otherwise, nobody is ever going to read it and make it useful in that way.